Is it?
All set? Oh, that's Hannah from North Haven.
It's your meeting, you can start it whenever you want to.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure Marjorie was all set. Hi, I'm Ellen Ellisoff and I'm chairman of the Housing Committee. Very grateful to all of you for coming today. We've been working very hard for about 1.5 years since the Housing Committee was reformed. We got a grant to do an anonymous housing assessment. We hired Mary Terry, who's worked with a lot of island communities, and we got a lot of good information. But we know that not everyone who needs housing filled out a housing survey. So we really want input from people in the community about what their specific needs are. So if there's anybody here who didn't fill out the survey, who has information or has needs, we'd like to know what they are. There's a housing overview on the table as you come in as to what we've done in the last 1.5 years. Also, some of my business cards, just in case someone wants to get in touch with me or another member of the Housing Committee. Let's see. The Housing Committee looked at the town zoning ordinance and tried to come up with ways that we could make housing more available in the communities. So we started with the town water and sewer area, and we recommended to the Planning Commission, which I'm also on, to make some changes to allow for accessory structures that already exist in the community to be converted to residences. So wherever they are on a property within town water and sewer, as long as they could be made year-round and comfortable and appropriate for housing, they can't just be, an unheated shed, but they could be converted. And there are different sizes according to our zoning for different size apartments. Like a studio apartment would be 350 square feet. A 2-bedroom apartment would be 600. 4-bedroom apartment would be 900. So those are just the minimum sizes. They could be bigger, obviously. We're getting rid of the requirement for parking spaces for each dwelling unit, not requiring larger setbacks. We're just trying to make things easier and better for people to be able to convert existing structures. And if there's a desire to try to create more housing outside of the water and sewer area, we could look at that. But that's more complicated because of existing septic systems that might have to be increased if there are more bedrooms. So Darlene's going to talk a little bit about our work doing air sealing and energy work.
Well, in the process of talking about what our issue out here, part of the issue is keeping people in their existing homes, which means making their homes livable so that they don't become part of the renting situation. If they can't afford to live in their home, they may have to move out and become part of the renting situation out here. So we looked into what the process would be to do some winterizations, because most people indicated that heating and repairs was the main issue that they had. And we secured the grant money, right? Yes, we did secure grant money to help with this, and we just needed 19 applicants for the funding, which are available still with Candy Barton.
Yeah, through HEAP applications, which is Home Energy Assistance Program.
Yeah.
If you qualify for HEAP, you qualify for energy audits and air sealing, and other programs like home repair and things like that. So we've been trying to get people signed up for that. There are sample applications in the vestry of the church. It's been I put information in the wind. The last 2 winds has information. So we're hoping that more people will take advantage of that. We got grant funding for 19 homes, and we have a contractor who's willing to come out in September and start doing that. So we just need to be sure that we have enough people signed up for him to come.
And that's pretty much that.
Okay. And the other thing we were doing is looking at town-owned land to see where a new building could take place. And we went around and looked at, I don't know, Kathy's going to talk about that.
We went around and looked at several pieces of property that the town owns out of town, and looked at the net factory property in town. The ideal place would be in town because we could connect to water and sewer. So that's where we're at right now with that.
Okay, so we're very fortunate. Jason Bird is here from Penquist. He's a building developer. We reached out to 7 or so different possible developers and very fortunate to have Penquist interested in working with us.
So there wasn't really a lot of competition as well.
No, so far no competition. But you were with us when we had the housing committee previously.
Yes.
You came out and visited with us and toured the island and,
Mhm.
so we know you're interested in helping us out here. And we're very grateful for that. I have Jason's bio here because he probably won't talk about himself.
There's no need.
He joined Penguis in May of 2015. Most recently, he was the Community and Economic Development Director for the City of Bangor. Formerly worked as a Senior Program Director with the Mid-Coast Council of Governments in Damariscotta. Jason has nearly 10 years of project development and management experience with a strong record of federal, state, and local grant writing and fundraising. Jason holds a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's in public administration, both from the University of Maine. He currently serves on the board of the Bangor Area Homeless Shelter and the MPBN Community Advisory Board.
That's old, actually.
Is it? Well, that's on your website.
Yeah, okay, there we go.
So Jason's going to speak a little bit about what they've done, what Penquist has done, and what he might be able to do out here, and basically answer any of your questions and hopefully get some input.
Yes. Yeah, could you please? I'll refer to it. No idea where I should stand, but.
Jake, where will the camera pick him up?
Where are we talking about?
Oh.
I could play hide and seek with it. There we go. I will, sorry, I'm gonna make it difficult for you, aren't I? Then I can do the shifting here. I can alleviate that. So thank you all for coming. This is exciting. I told Ellen and the committee members on a regular basis. I'm often not wanted in town because I propose developing affordable housing. So when community members are interested and engaged and ask us to come, I usually try to drop whatever I can and be here. So I think I'll fast forward and kind of go past history and the data on the need for affordable housing. One, because I don't have it memorized, but two, I think it's fairly well known that I think just about every community in the country needs affordable housing. So I'll talk quickly about some of what Penquist does and what we're about, and then a little bit about just housing development and the work that we've done, and then talk a little bit further about a potential site in town that we have a lot of interest in that we think is a suitable site, and give you just a little bit of an idea of what we could do there, what we'd like to do there, but knowing that it's very early in the conversation and that no plans have been set. I mean, the town doesn't even fully own the property yet, of course, and U.S. citizens obviously haven't voted to say, oh yeah, we want to sell it to Penquist. So keep all that in mind. I certainly get encouraged and or may speak as if it's a done deal, but that's certainly not my intent. There's certainly a lot of additional work to go. Okay, so Penquist in a nutshell, our purpose and our mission is to address and alleviate poverty. And so we do that in a number of different ways. I think we have, by many accounts, over 60 different programs that serve low to moderate income individuals throughout sort of mostly Eastern Maine, but some programs even go the entire state. But it ranges everywhere from either childcare, transportation, heating assistance, and a variety of other services, and of course, affordable housing. I do want to quickly just have Mark raise his hand. Mark Lovin is actually recently hired as Penquist's regional manager for Knox County. So I don't really know his exact job description, but for lack of a better term, and he's only been with Penquist for about 3 weeks, so he doesn't even know it either. But he's sort of the liaison for people that need services. He does a lot of collaborations and sort of the head of some of the contracts and the things that we do on a more region-wide basis, but if you need help or want to know some more information about a program of service that we offer in Knox County, you can harass him after this, and we can give him a good orientation.
Yeah, I would just say, my job is really to make everyone's life easier. The people who run the agencies that help people, the people who need services. My job is just to connect resources with people who need resources. And whatever way I can.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, there are extra chairs here.
I mean, I can slide over, that's all, just tell them I can slide over. They want to sit down. Okay.
So from just going to the affordable housing side, Pinkless has developed over 400 homes. We try not to call them units because they're people's homes over the last 17 or 18 years. And they range everywhere from, you know, some of the bigger properties here that we've built. You can see a couple of different styles. The bigger, more massive buildings are typically older adult properties. So those are going to be properties that have people that are 55 and older in them. And then the more townhouse style designs are, we do that intentionally for families. So 2 and 3 bedroom homes, typically with kids, really don't often do well running down common hallways and disturbing neighbors and that kind of stuff. And so when we can, we try to develop family properties in more of a neighborhood feel, allowing kids to be able to quickly get outside and expel all the energy that they have. I have a 5-year-old, so I know very much how 5-year-olds act. So I think I want to quickly move to defining affordable housing, because there's probably a fair amount of uncertainty or questions perhaps around what do we mean by when we provide affordable housing. So traditionally, a home is affordable when someone spends about 30% of their income on either their mortgage and their utilities or their rent, whether that includes utilities or not. And so when we build affordable housing, though, we traditionally focus on individuals that are making about 60% or less of area median income. And sometimes people just assume affordable housing are the properties that have sort of all of the project-based vouchers in them, the individuals that are what we consider extremely low income. That's not really what affordable housing is today. One, because those project-based vouchers are really hard to come by. And so as developers, we really don't have a lot of access to those. But what we end up doing instead is trying to hit sort of the middle market. By creating units, in theory, you're being able to at least alleviate some of the pressure on the housing market and help to stabilize rents. But for context, someone that is 60% or less of area median income, if they are one person, so in instance, an older adult, right, a senior who's retired, they would need to make $33,000 or less in order to be income eligible for an affordable housing property, a traditional affordable housing property. I'll deviate from that in a little bit and talk about some other concepts that we're considering, but for these purposes. Under our rules and regulations, we wouldn't be able to charge that person for that 1-bedroom home more than $885 per month. And that would include utilities, except for telephone and usually TV. But we usually try to provide Wi-Fi, heat, water, sewer, all those things. If we were to build a family home or family rental home, and say it was a family of 3, so a single parent with 2 kids at home, that family could earn no more than $42,500 and be income eligible for that home. 2-bedroom rent, again, below Knox County market rate would be just over $1,000 a month. If you have any questions, it would save my voice, so feel free to jump in at any time. But obviously, you can save them to the end. Up to you. I will
Obviously,
take
this is sliding, changing with, inflation and everything.
Right. So this data is from Housing and Urban Development at the national level. It's updated for our programs once a year, typically in the spring. But you're right. It more likely than not will increase a little bit next year. But these numbers do go down at times as well. It's an imperfect science how they arrive there. We often will dispute it to ourselves because, HUD can sometimes be a black box just because they're so massive. But and they have a very tough job when it comes to trying to drill down even at a county level to figure out what is and isn't affordable based on the data.
So
they
these are
have.
county by county numbers.
They are county. Some bigger metropolitan areas do have, let's say, city of Bangor, Portland, Lewiston, Auburn. You can get data just for that town and maybe even their, the immediate communities, but that's because they have the data available. But on smaller areas, it's on a county basis. So, for instance, Knox County, there is no the data isn't singled out for just one individual community. There we go. So when we build affordable housing, traditionally, we have a couple of boxes we have to check. And that's because our funders require us essentially to check those boxes, because it wouldn't make any sense for us in this day and age to build affordable housing way out of town in the middle of a field where it's just cheaper and there's no neighbors to care, go to town meeting or planning board meetings and yell at us that we're doing something terrible. So in order to make sure that the individuals that live there, the tenants that live there have a good quality of life, it's important for us to have good access to grocery stores, banks, services, and those kinds of things, so they don't become transportation dependent, right? So we're in a rural town, and here, in this instance, we're on an island, right? So there isn't a bus that usually can, go by and allow tenants to be able to hop on and go down the road to the grocery store. So it's imperative if we were to build here that we find a location that's suitable. Connection to water and sewer matter a lot because wells dry up. Imagine, if you have one house, a single home, and your well dries up, that's a little bit of a different story. As a property owner with, say, 20 to 30 units or 20, 30 homes in it, that would be a nightmare because it would be our responsibility to try to provide potable water for clients and tenants. So, as was said, the committee was very gracious with their time. Back in April, I came out and we hopped into a van or truck, I can't remember now, Jeep or whatever it was, and we bombed around town. We looked at 5 or 6 different town-owned properties, and in addition to that, I've spent a fair amount of time, as I do anyway, looking for suitable sites in town. And as many of you can imagine, trying to find something that's an acre plus, roughly, that has sort of checks all those other boxes that I had mentioned in town is nearly impossible. So, quickly we arrived, or I should say I arrived at the Net Factory site, being probably the only property in town that would make sense for us or any other developer to come out and say, okay, we can build affordable housing here and actually try to make it work. And the part of that challenge is when we build affordable housing, we have to be at a certain scale that makes sense, because we're renting renting below market, right? So we're already at a somewhat of a disadvantage when it comes to our operating expenses. And so we, as a result, need to have a critical mass of homes to be able to pull a little bit of revenue off of each unit in order to be able to maintain the property to our standards and to the standards of our funders. And so that range often is somewhere between 25 to 35 units or homes per development. It's not ideal in that, it can quickly look like a big box. It can quickly look like sort of institutional housing almost, right? Without proper design. There's an architect here, so she can probably identify the challenge with trying to make things look beautiful. I think, the pictures that I showed earlier, let's see if I can actually effectively do it. What you see here may not be striking in a lot of respects when you compare, multi-million-dollar properties or homes that you consider beautiful, but this sort of strikes the balance between not looking like a standard box, but yet trying to be mindful of the public resources that we're using to be able to build affordable housing. So, we go through great pains to try to actually make what we do look good, but at the same time, we're limited in our resources, just like any sort of, a family budget, right? You can't just build whatever you want, whenever you want, because you've got to be sensible about the funding that you have available. So the Net Factory site for us is by and large probably the only, I think the only opportunity that we probably have, unless someone knows of a landowner in town that's willing to sell us a piece of property at a reasonable price. If you do, I'll give them a business card. It's not without certainly its challenges. One, timing is an issue. Obviously the town and the water district are co-owners in the property right now, and we're, at that, I'm assuming that, we would get to a town vote. It would be a unanimous, vote in support of us, and, everyone would sing Kumbaya, and it would be like motherhood and apple pie. But, so what I'll say next is, assuming that there is, broad support in town for that, and if and when we ever get there, the next slide would be kind of focusing on my early thoughts of what we could do at that site. So based on the data available, based on sort of the population trends and those kinds of things, my initial thought would be the bulk of the units of the homes in the property that we would develop would be for those that are 55 and older. We used to call them seniors, but I think it's more appropriate to call them older adults. The other hope that we have, though, by being a little bit creative, by being a little bit flexible, that we would want to try to address the need for families as well, and only as a means to an end, maybe try to do market rate housing as well. The thought being, though, on that last one, it's not our mission, but it could be an opportunity for us by providing some market rate units to be able to keep the affordable rents low by being able to draw revenue off of the market rate units. Again, not something that we do on a regular basis, because if I can build a home, if I can build a unit, I want to keep it for somebody that needs an affordable home. However, with rents that are in this town that you could probably get either on a short-term basis or a year-round basis, it's an opportunity, at least, that I want to convey that we would like to look at, because I think that there's revenue potential from a selfish perspective to be able to fulfill our core mission, right? So, and I could hammer that home, and I'll certainly happy to flesh that out further if any of you want to see what that looks and feels like. But our main focus obviously would be, I think, affordable units, and in particular those that are 55 homes. When we build a property, we are essentially given funding up front from a variety of sources, and it would take me hours to sort of explain some of those. But when we build it, we're given the capital and the cash up front through grants and tax credits and other things. We're then left to our own devices. After it's built, after it's leased up and functional, no one is coming to bail us out. So, but at the same time, though, we have very stringent expectations and requirements from our funders to say, we're giving you this money, right? It's imperative that you keep it not looking like the public housing back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, right? Where it established a reputation that, sort of nonprofits and the housing community have worked very hard to try to stave off or try to correct. And so when we do that, when we sign on and say, okay, we're going to build this property, give us the money, we'll make it work, all these good things. We then pledge for, and I'm skipping down the last bullet here for your sake. We then pledge for decades to come, at a minimum of 60 years, that we're going to be able to retain that property and keep it as affordable housing. I'll tell you right now, we never sell our properties. It's going to be longer than 60 years. But the point I want to make, though, is when we build it with high quality material to start with, because no one, like I said, is coming to bail us out afterwards, because we have a standard tenant landlord relationship after that, right? We don't have additional subsidy that comes in from state or federal sources to help us put the new roof on the building, fix a window, fix a leaky pipe or anything like that. So when we build with quality, and then we staff it with quality staff that can help us not only maintain our reputation, locally and at the state level, for being a very good steward of the properties that we have, But at the same time, it helps fulfill our mission by providing quality housing. And so our plan would be that, as a part of that market rate unit here, we probably have some sort of not really owner occupied unit, but we'd have an on-site person that would be available 24/7 to be able to respond to that emergency call. As you all know, living on an island, it would be impossible for us to say, we're going to station a crew in Rockland, or we're gonna have a contractor in Rockland that can respond to those calls. That's not likely, right? And so we want to make sure, though, that we have quick access to be able to get to an emergency need and to keep the hallways clean and to be able to address the ground when they're necessary. On top of that, and another reason why we have to have a critical mass is that we have additional on-site staff that become a resource for the tenants and for those that are living there. The goal being, we don't just put someone in an apartment and say, great, have fun, good luck, make sure your rent's paid on time. Instead, what we do, we hire what we call resident services coordinators. And so they would be on site at least a day a week to be able to meet with tenants, find out if they, have got their heating assistance application, or hey, you had a slip and fall last week. Have you talked to your primary care provider? Do you need a grab bar? Those types of things, right? And when we, in that resident services coordinator, they sort of has a two-pronged approach. When we are renting to someone who's an older adult, we don't have expectations that they're going to be able to move out of poverty and be able to no longer need our affordable housing unit. Instead, we try to create an environment to allow them to thrive in place, right? But when we do rent to someone that's a family, a younger couple, we establish expectations and say to them, essentially, we want to get you to a point where you no longer need us, right? And so we work with them on a plan, either if their gap and their sort of wage gaps are resulting of education, well, let's work towards that. If it's childcare, well, guess what? Within Peoples, we have childcare programs. And essentially just work with their needs and find a way to move them out of poverty and move them out of, like I said, needing an affordable rental property. And I'm happy to say we have just with, I want to say probably out of the 400 units or homes that we've built, we probably have 175 family properties. Both of them are older adult properties. But of those 175 homes, we routinely have 12 to 15 homes on a good year. They move out of our apartments because they're buying their own home, which is fantastic. We love it. Not every landlord is happy when someone moves out, but it allows us to fulfill our mission and allow someone else to come in who really needs that home. And so I want to highlight that only because I think it's a unique approach that many affordable housing developers take. We're not the only ones that do it. I think we do it the best. But if you talk about like Avesta or Community Housing in Maine, many of these other entities do the same thing. We ideally don't want to exist, but we have to exist because there's a need for affordable housing. But while we're doing it and while we're fulfilling our mission, we might as well try to make people's lives a little bit better versus them just always depending on our services. Okay, sorry, a little bit of soapbox, I'll get off. One thing that I want to highlight within that factory site in particular, if again, fast forwarding, assuming we're going to build there, all that good stuff. The ground floor, because it's in a floodplain, would be largely useless to us. So that's an opportunity for the town. There could be a co-development there, either structurally with the town itself or with a separate organization or nonprofit or even a business. But there could be an opportunity for that ground floor space to be utilized for something else. Conversation for another day, but I want to mention it. And just to say that I think if and a couple of other ideas have been bandied about in terms of what we could put or what the community could put on that ground floor, but I think it's a unique opportunity where we wouldn't want to pass it up, right? We could alternatively, I'll have just sort of parking underneath or something like that and do it in a tactful way. But I wouldn't want to do that if there is an identified need, an identified organization that could come in and utilize that space right in downtown in the heart of the community, would just make a lot of sense. I mentioned, of course, the scale. The number floats and sort of ebbs and flows in my mind. It's like a billionaire when they say what their value is. It's, well, it depends on the day and depends how I feel. The number of units sort of ebbs and flows depending on how, well, depending on a variety of factors, not least of which zoning, not least of which the density. And I can't come to you and say, oh, I'm gonna build the exact number of units right now because, I have the answer and, I'm a genius. The reality is we haven't engaged an architect or an engineer yet to look at the site and say, okay, here are the limitations, here are the setbacks, here are the other site constraints that we have. What could we build? It's premature for me to do that, but I would say by quick analysis, I think we would be in the 25 to 30-ish range appropriately, and still make it look good and still make it fit into the fabric of the community. But I just don't have an exact number right now. The last thing I'll say on this page is how we would build it. In an ideal world, I would be able to employ, we'd be able to employ every contractor here and have it be obviously an economic development tool as well. That's not likely, considering talking to committee members, they, no offense to any contractors in the room, but they bemoan the fact that they can't get people to come fix things at their house, right? It's really hard right now on the island to find contractors to respond because they're just so busy. I think you guys were earlier celebrating someone who got their house painted. That's just sort of a big accomplishment right now. And even on the mainland, it's an issue, but probably less so, I think, in terms of scale and challenge. So one thing that we would do, and I've gone so far, is just to make sure that we could do it from its early perspective, is looking at modular construction. So that would likely take form of us at a minimum panelizing the walls and doing some stuff, doing as much construction offsite as possible, just to minimize the amount of bodies that we would have to have here, buttoning things up and putting the building together. And or maybe looking at sort of creating pods or building, entire units or big sections of the building, bringing them out, bringing them on site and dropping them in like a Lego piece. To me, that's probably the more likely scenario. But we have to think about some of the logistics, and there's people have done it 100 times now in bigger cities and in high rises and skyscrapers across the country. So I know it can be done. And that would also minimize the impact of the community in terms of number of trucks driving through town, or just the sort of disturbance in terms of having a large construction site right in the community. So what usually will take us probably a year to build, stick built from scratch, could be, we could save a couple months off of that, I hope, knowing that we could, in theory, be constructing those pods or units throughout the winter or something on the mainland, and we can bring them up. So, again, taking a leap of faith, assuming every citizen in town is going to come out to the town meeting and vote in favor of selling us the net factory and allowing us to build affordable housing there. I want to just sort of lay out what those next steps would look like. And fast forwarding sort of through the conversations that the town has to have with the water district and, going there. But I know that at least from an initial conversation we've had with the select board, they've said, if God willing, the creek don't rise, and we get to a point where, where the whole owners, they would be supportive of a town meeting where, the citizens can vote on something like that. So, the sort of the shape and the form that I think is best, assuming again, town members vote to sell us the property, would look something like a very long-term purchase and sale agreement. So when you buy a house, you have 60 to 90 days or whatever, 30 to 45 days to do, have an inspection, get financing, do all those kinds of things. With this though, with a development of this size, it takes much longer to do that. We've got to go through permitting, we've got to go through, compiling all our financing, and then not least of which, we have to send all of that package, those items, to, in our case, for the most part, Maine Housing. They have other projects in their pipeline, including some of ours from other communities, that they also have to look through. These are very complex deals. And then on top of it, you're adding in investors and people who need certain returns on that investment and a variety of other layers. And so it takes the better part of a year just to, once we have the contract in place, for us to design it, to permit it, and then to sort of wait for us in sort of a hopper, right? To allow us to be able to go and, basically get a letter of funding, a letter of credit that we can then go talk to a contractor and say, hey, we've got the money. Now we need you to build it for us. And then obviously, like I mentioned earlier, construction will take about a year. That's an overgeneralization right now, but my hope is that we will keep it to that or less. I think. if I
Jake,
remember-
Could
Yes,
you talk about the funding opportunities, the fact that Maine Housing has a funding
Yes.
and also the specific island focused funding and the
Yes.
fact that there's so many.
Ellen is a proud plant for me, so she can bring up the fact that I didn't. There is some sense of urgency with this in part because there's a perfect storm right now of unique funding opportunities that allow us to have this conversation. When I came out years ago with the sort of, Housing Committee 1.0, the statement I made was, I feel bad for you guys, but there's nothing I can do. There's no funding available to allow me to actually build here, or in sort of any scale that would make sense for us to do it. Fast forward to now, we actually have a couple of walk-in programs, meaning Maine Housing has said, we have enough capital available. So you as a developer, go out and find properties or, package up that deal that we talked about in communities that otherwise aren't going to be eligible to get what is our traditional round of tax credit funding. And you're sort of putting a magical box over here of funding that you can't see, but without boring you all with the details, you basically have an ability to sort of, say, hey, we have the land, we have the site contract. Here's all the pricing because we talked to an architect, engineer, and contractors. Here's what we can build it for. And then we kind of put it all together. What Ellen really wants me to say, and I'll say it, is that there's a limit to that time period, right? I don't know when it's going to dry up, essentially, or when it's all going to be gobbled up. But Maine Housing has essentially said, now is the time. If you can package it, put it in, and we can make it work. We don't know when that door closes, but it's open now. And the other funding in particular, Maine Housing just released, again, another sort of walk-in program, meaning there's no deadline to apply, but as soon as it's on a first come, first served basis, like the other funding I was just talking about, once it's gobbled up, it's gone. And that's specific to island funding. So the governor and actually Hannah Pingree, who is from North Haven, I believe, is in the Office of Innovation in the Future within sort of the State House, have intentionally identified funding specific to island communities, and MDI intentionally wasn't included because there's probably a bridge that connects them. They're not really. I was hoping I was getting more chocolate out of that, but okay. But so there's, I think, only 10 or 12 island communities identified as eligible there. So not a very deep pocket of or pool of candidates to draw from. So naturally, an island this big with a community this big would be a good fit for that funding. And again, that's an opportunity that we don't yet know, when it will dry up, but it's something that I would want to sort of package the two together. And as I mentioned earlier, when it would be maybe some of this, maybe some of that, and maybe some of that. That's how I, in my mind, would envision doing it, because traditionally, when we build housing, the IRS and our other funders can say you can do one or the other. You can't do both. You can't take, older adult housing and mix it with family housing. I don't know why. It doesn't make sense. And we advocate all the time that needs to change, because that's not how communities are. You don't have communities of just young people. You don't have, entire towns made up of just old people. But that's sort of the issue we traditionally have to deal with. But by, utilizing this lot, my hope would be that we would sort of internally condominiumize them and try to, within the same building, have a mix of ages and a mix of incomes to allow sort of the whole thing to work. That's my hope. It may be sort of leave it to Beaver-esque mentality, but right now, at least, I think it's viable. All right, I've done a lot of talking. I talk fast and I mumble and I'm sorry. Do you have questions? Are there things that I can clarify?
Are the over 55 units mean for?
If you want to. So the question is, if are the older adult homes for single individuals?
Yeah.
right, You're saying, or couples?
Will they accommodate a couple?
It can be couples as well. I would say that we typically, when we design an older adult home, it's somewhere around 700 square feet, 1 bedroom, with a full kitchen and, full bathroom, and more than enough storage. The challenge that we often have, though, is that individuals that are, if you have even one person in the household that's working, you're often going to be over income, right? So it does work out for, say, 2 individuals that are on Social Security, and that's the only income source they have. That's sort of the sweet spot. It does happen in the properties I showed you earlier. We have a mix of couples and we have a mix of just individuals, widowers, or divorced adults. So actually, it's funny. We have 2 best friends that are divorced that are in 2 different properties right next to each other, but they've been divorced for however many years, but now they're like best friends. And it's like, well, you guys just move back in together and then open up a unit. But the other thing I'll mention around sort of the older adults housing homes, we build them, they're intentionally independent living, right? So it isn't housing for people that need daily support services or those kinds of things. We don't have the staffing. That's not the model available right now. And part of the reason why we take advantage of being able to rent to those that are 55 and older and or 55 and up is that by doing so, we're able to create still an independent community where someone who, we have this situation, we have tenants that are in their 90s, right? And they sometimes still drive or they need help getting groceries in. People that are a little bit more spry, that are in that sort of, that's in their 50s, can help those neighbors out. While we're there to, fix leaks and, change light bulbs at times even, we're not there to shovel off cars and we're not there to be able to, lug groceries in on a consistent basis. Of course, if we see someone who needs that help, we'll do it, but we just don't have the capacity or the funding to do that. So it's important to note that, this wouldn't replace, the variety of nursing homes we've lost in the state, or supplant the, forgetting the name of the community.
Final Haven Elder Care Services.
Right. This would be strictly independent living. Yes.
We have an existing structure there at the site.
Yes.
And you had mentioned, although I love the whole idea of prefabricated pieces, but I've never seen them used in the renovation of a building. And all the structures that you had photos of appear to me to be new buildings. Have you done renovations, or will that existing building be removed and replaced?
It's a very good question. I did gloss over that. We have done renovations before. We've done historic renovations of properties. In this instance, though, in our mind, it could be a complete tear down and build new. I don't think, while I love old properties and want to retain them when possible, it's not feasible at this site. And if for no other reason, it's more likely than not that property is heavily contaminated with, oils and paints and everything else, right? So that's something that we've factored into our interest and into the equation. But it's in order to have people be able to live on that property, we have to tear those down, have to scrape a lot of material, a lot of contaminated soil and haul it off.
Yeah, I assume that. What is to prevent what happens in many communities where a a developer like yourself constructs a building, or there are existing apartments, and they're rented by people from other places, and then they rent it for $1,000 a month. But then they turn around and sublet it through Airbnb or some other source at $1,500 a week. And all of a sudden, that unit that we thought was going to be servicing our community isn't.
Yep.
How do you prevent that from happening?
By fear of jail and fear of heavy penalties. So when we
How
mentioned
do you
earlier,
manage that?
how we manage it, well, we have a very good property management company.
But you said they come in once a week.
Well, that's sort of an on-site, that would be a Pinquist employee that comes in,
Oh, okay.
not talking about their tenancy or anything like that, or saying, hey, your rent is due. They're instead meeting one-on-one to say, what are your needs? What can we do to keep you here healthy, or to be able to pay that rent? Or, what can we do to fill a gap that you have? But around the prevention measures for, fraud and whatever else you would call it, we have, and I mean this in a good way, we have the IRS, Maine Housing, and our investors and our bankers breathing down our neck. And so we have a number of different mechanisms when we do not only the initial lease up, but also when we lease to a new tenant to ensure that this is their permanent home, or this is their full-time home. They're free to go and travel and whatever, of course, but and that within the lease provisions, there's a lot of language around it, you can't do stuff like that. But at the same time, we have a very active property management company that connects on a regular basis, not only with tenants and with their neighbors, but that kind of stuff would get out. And it wouldn't be an issue. I don't think we've never had that issue. We do, scour the internet in case and look on Airbnb and those kinds of things. And I can say, thankfully, we've never had that issue. It may be a problem in bigger cities or in hotter markets, but not here.
Yeah, well, I read about it.
Yeah.
I've never seen it, but I know that. Happens.
Yeah.
Do you ever construct a unit where there's a combination of condominiums and rental units?
We traditionally don't, and that's because when we build a home, an affordable rental home, they're very expensive. And on balance, when we do that, the investors and the funders, rightfully so, say, I'm not going to give you basically any grant money to build that market rate home or that condo, right? And so you're on your own. And so when we build it, it's more expensive because of all the hoops we have to jump through and all the other things we have to do. We just simply can't afford to then, rent it, because no private developer would pay that amount of money to then rent it out at whatever market rate, right? That is not tradition. That's probably not true for Vinyl Haven. And that is kind of what I was hinting at earlier, that there could be an opportunity where we're able to keep rents low by maybe having market rate, or if appropriate and or allowed by the town, some short-term rentals is a possibility. Not saying it has to happen, but we would like to explore it.
When you say short term, what's the definition of that?
The definition would coincide with the town's definition of short-term rental.
Okay, we'll be working on that.
I know that's a hot topic in many towns, and probably here too. As a bit of an editorial, if we were to partner with the town on this, we wouldn't want to go against sort of the sort of consensus of the community, right? So if you all see short-term rentals as a problem for especially year-round population, they are, then we wouldn't do it, right? Even if we thought, okay, we're going to help, offset this many other, the rents on this many other units. But if it's determined, okay, it's not going to be a big deal because you're talking about maybe 2 short-term rentals, okay, fine, then we'd like to explore that. But that's in my mind, that's the opportunity that the town has with this site, right? So while, in theory, we're going to be helping out because we're going to take a very blighted and contaminated property off the town's hands. Again, fast forwarding to say we're going to, be able to do it. But beyond that, the town has the right and ability, and I would encourage you to do it, to add other conditions to that transfer of property, right? So the town could put in the deed, it's gonna be affordable for, a billion years. You can't do any short-term rentals ever. If you sell it, well, we want money back, all these things, right? The town could and should do that. That's down the road certainly, and that's gonna be probably a select board conversation, but when we work with towns to buy their properties or to develop something, we always encourage it, because again, we're a nonprofit, right? We're not a for-profit developer, and so it's okay for us to sort of take on those additional strings attached.
Paul, are you aware that the net factory site, that the building that's there is a portion of what was there historically?
Yeah, I saw from the photograph.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
because my understanding is that was a wing that was, or section that was put on for mechanics when maybe
The
when
existing building.
yeah, the existing building, and that the original building was a completely different building, and it was is it possible to go back to that slide?
Maybe.
It, it was a big building, with a peaked roof, and then you could see that flat roof building sort of
Right,
stuck in the back, and it's kind of hard to imagine how they got so much building in that space, but they did.
Ellen, does the current town ordinance
Yes.
allow for the density that's being talked about?
Probably not. We'd have to change our ordinance. But we can do that because we're the town, and all we have to do is vote on it. If the community wants this to happen and it's possible, then the community can vote to make an exception or change the ordinance for the specific site or something. I mean, I think anything's possible.
Yeah, there's the.
Yeah.
Right, there may very well have to be variances associated with our request. I haven't gone so far as to identify what those are, because we haven't, designed the building, and that would be premature certainly, but I could say that more likely than not, we're probably going to tip over the traditional density requirements that you have.
All right, the last question, the town currently, as we all know, is proposing and will implement renovation of Main Street.
Mhm.
That includes a new sewer line and water line. Will that be tapped into this site?
I can't say that
It
the
should be.
funding, it should be,
Yeah,
if it isn't,
There's not gonna be a new sewer line.
there's not gonna be new sewer line,
No, it's just a new water.
new
main.
water line.
Yeah.
Okay. Does the sewer line go to this site now?
if it doesn't, it's maybe 100 feet away, it's right on
No,
Main
it
Street.
goes to, there's a bathroom in there for the
Oh, okay, yeah.
town garage
We-
and they have water, they have to have water for the water district so they can test the water. That's like one of the main things. That's why they haven't moved, because they have to move somewhere else with the town water.
I see.
I can tell you that from all the stuff that's gone on the last couple of years.
Okay, oh, interesting, that's good to know. But so probably the service lines are a little bit smaller. We would have to tap in and probably put bigger lines in, but, yeah.
Because that work is being proposed now.
It is,
Going to
yeah.
begin in the fall.
In an ideal world, yes, if they're doing upgrades, then, really a bigger line should be brought to that site, because if it's not us, it's gonna be probably somebody doing something there, right, you would think, and so rather than tear the street back up in 3 or 4 years to bring a bigger line, it would be nice, but if it's been designed and priced, I can't imagine, you're gonna find a contractor who's gonna say, oh, sure, I'll just go ahead and dig a bigger trench and put a bigger pipe in there for free, so.
I have mentioned it. I don't
Yeah.
know whether it's in the plans or not. But I
Yeah,
have
if it's
mentioned
not, it would be, in the grand scheme of things, probably not a very big expense, all things considered.
Yeah, that should be followed up with Gail.
it. Okay,
Gabe.
Yeah.
I wonder, you mentioned the main housing funding and the island funding. What are you anticipating is their contribution as a percentage of the funding that you're gonna get?
That's a good question. It's probably going to be 60 to 70% of the project cost.
That's a lot.
Yeah, but it's not main housing per se. So main housing is what I call the arbiter of the low-income housing tax credit program for the state. So what ends up happening is through the IRS, there's a very convoluted and complex structure created for these deals or these projects. Banks who have taxable income, instead of paying that dollar to the IRS, there's a program that allows them to pay some or a discounted portion of that to us instead to be able to build the housing, right? So rather than paying Sam $1, they can pay us 85, 90 cents. You multiply that over millions of dollars, it makes sense, right? So main housing, though, rightfully so, is the sort of gatekeeper of those, what we call tax credits.
So having an island community that you talked about, you think it'd be about 70%?
It could be, yeah, yep, and then the rest would be, we'll try to, we always try to apply for grants here and there. And then on the sort of last bit, would be hard debt that we have, payable debt that we have, because there's always a gap. And there's always not enough money to pay, the entire construction cost, because more likely than not, given current prices, we're probably looking at anywhere from $8 to $10 million to build something.
And that's about how much per square foot?
You're asking the wrong person. A lot, no. So I need to couch what I'm about to say, so don't fall out of your chairs when I say it. I gotta explain it, but when we build, say, a one-bedroom home, that's about 700 square feet, full bathroom, all that kind of stuff. It's north of right now, probably $275,000, all in. Actually, maybe even a little bit higher when you add some other costs. You're probably thinking to yourself as a taxpayer, why the heck am I paying $275,000 for a one-bedroom home where I could, there's mobile homes that are a lot cheaper.
You're in a unit, not a freestanding house. So.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. Right, so you would think there'd be more efficiency in a stacked unit, right? The challenge is, one, I mentioned sort of when we build it, we try to build it to a very high quality. We don't have granite countertops, we don't have hardwood floors, but because when we build it, no one's bailing us out, we have to go with very high energy efficiency homes to save on heating costs and those kinds of things. But we also can't afford to replace the roof or the shingles or whatever else in 10 years, right? We've got to stretch as long as we can. On top of that, unfortunately, there are a lot of legal fees associated with it, because the investors that are involved have a vested interest in making sure that every T is crossed, every I is dotted. I always mess it up. And that's because they would be very heavily penalized by the IRS if we built this property, right? And they're technically a part owner for a period of time, and we let it fall apart. We don't have the money to repair it and all this other stuff. Main housing comes out and does an inspection and it fails. Well, then no longer is it eligible for their credits. And the IRS comes back and says, oh yeah, by the way, you're a part owner of this. It's not to the standard necessary. You got to pay us a bunch of money. Same reason why when we build it and retain it as affordable housing, we have all these people breathing down our neck to make sure that it remains affordable. And so when you live there, sometimes you have to live under a microscope, which isn't ideal. But we have to verify your income on at least an annual basis. And your rent can fluctuate a little bit. So if you start making a little bit more money, sometimes you have to pay a little bit more. But there are, getting back to the fact that it costs so much, there's a lot of paper, a lot of checks and balances that go into it, and everyone's got to be paid, right? And it's just the reality of the situation. In the perfect world, we wouldn't have to do it that way, but this is really the only, primarily the low-income housing tax credit program. It's pretty much the only way to fund affordable housing in this country right now to any scale. And it's a weird system, and it's strange, and no one gets it, but it works for now.
Well, plus you probably have a lot more building codes when you're building something like that than you would on our,
Oh,
like I
yeah.
would on a normal home. Fire codes and everything, you gotta
Correct.
put a lot more money into all that stuff.
Correct, yeah. We have, when we build it, we then have to do, so there's move back, right? And so we're on like move back, plus in terms of energy performance, air sealing. The building is sprinkled, and there's a whole bunch of other costs associated with it. Doesn't make up the big difference, but it does help.
What is the process now for a town vote? Like how long before that's proposed?
I'm not a member of the town, so I can't.
So
The town and the water district are tenants in common at this point. So there is an agreement on the table, and that agreement has been sent to the town attorney to begin to draw up the papers. So all of that has to be agreed on, and then the selectmen have to bring it forward to town meeting. And then there's another proposal to that hasn't really been brought to the selectmen to somehow lease the property. I mean, the problem with the water district is that they don't have a place to move yet, and they're worried about that. And part of the project is to move them and build a new building for them, but they'd like to have maybe a little bit more guarantee. I don't know, you'd have to talk to them. But there is a proposal to somehow, before all these agreements are in place, somehow lease the property to them long-term. And then also at the same time convey the property to Penglis if the town wanted to do that, so that it could happen faster. It's moving a little bit slowly right now. So I don't have any idea when a vote might take place.
And then I have a question on the floodplain. When you said like the bottom floor, because it's in the floodplain, it's useless.
Well,
Is it- I mean, in
for our
other words, so does that mean that once you say, okay, we can't build on the bottom floor or for housing, you can build up from that?
Mhm.
And that's still okay?
yes, yeah, all the tenants have to run and jump into their windows. No, so a couple of things can happen. We would put, I don't know if you can really see it on here, but more likely than not, we would put the building in the back part of the lot. Because that's technically a little bit elevated and sort of closer to the edge of the floodplain. We'd elevate the building a little bit as well, and then we can engineer and design. We still have a lobby, obviously, with an elevator, right? So that tends to
You have
get
an
in.
elevator, that was another one.
Yes, oh, yes, of course, yeah, no, we definitely have an elevator. So we'd have to have some ground floor space, right? But there are ways that we can, have a sump pump and a generator and some other things that we can engineer ourselves out of having a big issue where tenants are stuck, basically in an island on an island. But the fact that our funders wouldn't allow us to build permanent housing there that could easily be impacted by, flood and then displaced, and what are you gonna do with all this kind of stuff? They don't care if it's, a shop or, some nonprofits, space, right? But they would care if it's someone's permanent home.
How would the homes be prioritized to people who are already in line? And would there be a percentage?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Could you repeat the question? I couldn't quite hear.
Sure. So it really boils down to, could there be a preference given to Vinyl Haven residents to, first come, first served basis? In an ideal world, we can do that. I have yet to find someone to give me that answer as to whether it's legal or not. So there's a couple of regulations, national laws and things, but the primary one is the Fair Housing Act. Some interpretations are that you can't do that because it's discriminatory. Others, including even by no means on a formal basis, but others that say mean housing said, I don't necessarily agree with that. Our attorney has said it's probably, probably not an issue. But the only way to find out is if we did it and then someone sued us and then it goes to court. I don't really want to do that, right? But what I think I will say is if we do this, right, if we were to go down this road, and that became a condition of the sale, right, for the town to say, hey, we'll give you this, but make sure, Vinyl Haven residents get first crack at the units. Certainly, if appropriate. Certainly, and if it were my town, I would try the same thing, right? I'm willing to have that language in there. Again, if appropriate and legal. And if we can do it legally, I would. Setting all that aside. One thing I often say to that question when I'm talking to members of the community is that because of the demand, we absolutely never advertise our homes, our rental homes, especially the new ones, right? So by default, island residents would probably have the first crack at it. Because I would imagine any member on this community is gonna be bugging on a regular basis, hey, when can we put in applications, when can we put in applications, when can we put in applications? Because it happens in other towns, right? So more likely than not, local people are gonna know when that happens, because we, again, aren't gonna put something out, in the paper, in Ellsworth American or whatever, the Bangor Daily, to say, hey, new affordable housing rental units are available. It's gonna be word of mouth that's gonna happen, because there's just so much demand. It doesn't make sense for us to pay a couple $100 to put something in the paper, because we know we're gonna be able to put it. That process has been successful. So for instance, in Bangor, we just have built 79 units over the last 2 years in the city of Bangor. Over 85% of those units are filled by either someone who currently lives in Bangor, or someone who used to live in Bangor but had to move out because it was so unaffordable, right? So that's perfect storm. And then I would say probably, because we keep this data, of the 79, and then over 50 were Bangor people, over 50, at least a dozen were individuals that, and these were all older adult homes, by the way, for those that are 55 and older. Over a dozen of those units came from people who own their own single family home but could no longer afford to keep it, right? So they then sold that home, probably made a lot of heck of money, probably made a lot of money, but they sold it. That then did what, the process works, right? They then opened up a new single family home for someone else to be able to, a family to move in or someone else to buy it, right? So we don't control and say, well, you gotta, sell it to only this person, but it helped the market in some respect. So, so very long-winded answer to say, I don't know. But if we can do it, we will. But I just don't know. I don't really want to have our case go to the Supreme Court. Any
Any
other
other-
questions?
You have to pre-rent before from a financing perspective.
That's the beauty of this, that one, because of Pinkless's financial strength, because at the end of the day, we have a corporate guarantee to say we'll pay back the mortgage and all this other stuff if for some reason we have to. The demand is so high that it's in the pro forma that we present is heavily vetted by all those funders and all those parties. And while we do by law, by the IRS rules and regulations, we have to do a market study, but it's the biggest waste of $6,000 you're gonna have to do. And everyone agrees with it, but in order to get it changed, you got to go to Congress, and we all know how that goes. But so we are obligated to do a market study. I can tell you and never look at them, because we already know there's sufficient demand to be able to fill the homes.
Some of these homes are occupied by families with young children. What kind of a yard are you looking at, or is this gonna be sidewalk and downtown?
Yeah.
Or is there some safety things around that?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I thought a lot about it, and in my mind, it's gonna be a very tight space, right? It's an acre, and that's why they're probably only going to be a few family homes or units in the building. I would lie and say I have it in my mind, pictured what the building's gonna look like, because I have, because it's what I do. There's probably going to be some sort of flat roof that's accessible. So there's some private, quiet space for the tenants, right? I'm really envious of Avesta Housing. They're based out of Portland. They've put a greenhouse on one of their buildings recently, because they're in the city, right? And they've got to be able to, provide some green space. I don't know if I'll put a greenhouse, but my intent would be there'd be some sort of private terrace for residents to be able to, have some sort of, outdoor space, because it's critically important, especially for kids. After that, thankfully there's at least a couple of, green spaces nearby, and or the school is in theory a little bit walkable. But right, it's a little bit of a trade-off that we have to do if we were to build here.
it's just a beginning too. The housing committee is looking at the opportunity to build, individual houses for
Yes.
families.
Yeah, some of the funding that is available, it's unfortunate that it's as a result of the pandemic, but there is additional funding available for the committee to maybe go after building semi-affordable or actually affordable single-family homes for ownership as well. It's not something we do on a regular basis, but it's certainly something that we encourage them to look at. And that could be an opportunity to sort of hit, both ends of the spectrum from a family perspective.
So it sounds like this specifically is leaving out a whole layer of people already here that need help.
Correct, yeah, we're looking straight at the rental market, right? Because that's, in this scenario, that's what we can help, that's what we can address. But there certainly is, from a home ownership perspective, more sites available, because in theory, if you're a homeowner, more likely than not, you have a few more resources you can afford to pay for, have, and keep maintained a car. So being a little bit outside of town, in theory, is okay, in my mind.
Jason, that was great. Any other questions or?
Yeah.
You're not allowed to ask questions.
Oh.
You're on payroll, you can't.
Could the ground floor be used for like family or kid-friendly space or some kind of inside or community space to kind of make community life better?
Yes, yeah, no, it's a very good point. And I swear I didn't have him ask that question on purpose, but one thing I did leave out though, is that as a part of the build, I'd say required, yeah, we're required to have what we call community space. So not only is there storage, ample, everything else, there is a room available in all of our properties where someone can have a birthday party, or they could have something else. But I like your idea of maybe having a separate play space for, especially if you've got toddlers in the building that, the parents don't want their walls to be crayoned all the time.
Do these homes have shared laundry facilities?
Yeah, there will be on-site laundry. We traditionally, due to size constraints and honestly, washing machines leaking, we don't often put them in the home itself. We actually intentionally design them so that if for some reason they're commercially inspected and installed and all that kind of stuff, but the coin-operated laundry units are designed so that if they do leak, there's a floor in the drain in the floor, there we go. And actually it would leak likely during chase, down to a chase lane to fall into the basement or whatever. But yes, there will be on-site laundry. It may be coin operated, but yes, on-site laundry.
Nice job, you guys.
Well,
Well, we
thank
just need you to advocate and, help us move it along.
The downtown project does mention that the Net Factory site would be a great site for a community center. So if this project were built, a community center on the first floor that was owned and managed by the town or nonprofit on Vinyl Haven would be, many of us think that would be a wonderful thing. Of course, it's up to the community, but you could see how beneficial that would be right at the end of Main Street, near the library and everything. Well, thank you, Jason. It's been wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for coming. If you have other questions or concerns, don't hesitate to contact any of us. My business card is sitting up there just so you have a phone number.
Well, there's a lot of talking.
Questions? What you doing?